The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, in what I consider to be the best state in the country. I have been wrong before, but I have someone on the line who's a guest who may concur. Jack O'Halloran, returning to the zone. You don't even know it. You've been on several podcasts on this network, and I'm delighted to have you back.
My pleasure. How are you this morning?
I'm doing very well. You are, in my mind, one of the most interesting people in the world. You've had a vast experience of eclectic stuff in your life. Let me just start with the fact that because I am a New York Jet fan from way back, that you were in the New York Jet training camp. You came darn close to making that Jet team. And let's start out with that. Can you tell me your experiences with that? And then we'll get to a book that you wrote and a whole bunch of other stuff.
In that era, back in the 60s, when we're talking, 1963, 64, you had to graduate from college before you could play pro ball. Your class had to graduate. Even if you didn't go to college, you weren't allowed to play until your class actually would graduate. So right. I left school.
I'm sure that was overturned because it's got to be unconstitutional to deny work.
Well, it was they had a thing of maturity. They wanted to make sure that ball players were physically and mentally mature enough, and they figured a certain age factor would be the case. And I still think that's probably a pretty good idea. But because I think it would eliminate a lot of injuries. But they invited me up to their camp, and I went up, and Eubanks liked what he saw, so they put me into there was a league on the East Coast where it was like a club for
kind of a semi-pro thing.
Yeah, it was semi-pro, and it was led into a lot of Jimmy Christie played there, a lot of people played there. So, but we used to play a couple games a week to keep your levels up and stuff. It was crazy. And when it came time for me to be eligible to play, there was a lot of friends of mine were down in Philadelphia playing. It was they had a pretty good nucleus football team down there, and a kid named Jerry Wallman had just bought the team, and they said, "Man, you got to come down here and play." So I talked to Eubank. He said, "Well," he said, you can go down there. It's no problem." He said, "But he said, if it doesn't work out for you, come on back up here. We'd love to have you." So I went down to Philadelphia, and then they hired a guy named Joe Q. Harrick, who I sat and watched him trade away a championship football team. He traded Sonny Jurgensen and Tommy McDonald, and he traded 5 guys to Green Bay for Jim Ringo, and then he traded some people to L.A. for it was ridiculous what he did. And, I said, I don't think this is good. So, and Talie had just won the title, and I said to some friends of mine, I can beat that guy. And they said, well, if you're disenchanted with football, let's put you in a gym. And that's what started my boxing career.
Well, and you made it to 10th ranked heavyweight contender, am I correct?
Yeah.
That's no small beans.
Well, to tell you something that's really funny about that is I think I'm one of 10 people in the history of boxing that became a ranked fighter without fighting amateur. Because
golden gloves, none of that.
None of that. Well, you couldn't, because in those days you weren't allowed to fight. You weren't allowed to do any amateur sports and pro sports at the same time. So if you were involved in a pro team, then you were considered a professional. So you had no choice.
I'd like to know, what was your final boxing experience like? Final thing.
The problem that I had was that I had and found out in the course of my boxing career that I had a disease called acromegaly, which is a tumor of the pituitary, and actually shouldn't have been boxing at all. I mean, I remember when I went to the doctor to find out about it. When I found out about it when I went to fight Ken Norton in San Diego, and the physician there was a really sharp guy, and he saw promotion pictures of me a couple of years old, and he looked at me and he said, you know, kid, you're an acromegalic. And I said, yeah, right. Can I fight or not? He said, yeah, but it's something you really have to get taken care of. So I stayed in California because I gave Norton a hell of a licking, and I stayed in California, became California heavyweight champion, and in the course of that, he told me one day, he said, you know, if you don't go to Scripps and get a workup done, I'm going to pull your boxing license because this disease will kill you. And I like it. And we became good friends. So I went to Scripps, and sure enough, he was right on the down, boy. This thing was flaring like crazy. And I went up to the Mass General Hospital.
What is the treatment, and is it ever cured, or?
What they do is they at that time in the 70s there was a man in Boston by the name of Raymond Choberg. He was a pioneer in the disease, and they had a machine called the cyclotron proton machine, which they use today for prostate cancer for men and stuff. It's a laser beam that doesn't burn. So they had one at Harvard Medical Center, and I went up to the Mass General and saw this guy, and he said to me, what do you do for that? I told him, he said, how can you possibly fight? He said, this disease causes the greatest depression. And how do you do that? I said, well, are we going to fix it or not? We did, and I was very lucky that they hit me with this thing. They bolt this machine to your head, and they zapped it out. And that was the first time they hit it. It dissolved the tumor. And and I was in the hospital, and I was supposed to stay there for 2 weeks. And 2 days after they zapped it out, I said, I got to go. And the guy said, what do you mean you got to go? I said, I got to leave. So I had to fight Larry Middleton down in Baltimore, Maryland, who was ranked number 2 in the world.
This is 2 days after
3 days after. 3 days afterwards, I went down to. It was actually a week after when I fought him. Yeah. He told me I was a maniac, but you know, it is what it is.
Now, looking back, I'm 71, so
I'm 75.
I assume you're just around that age.
75.
Whoa, you're in good voice, Jack. And
75.
Let me ask you this: looking back with wisdom, would you have handled things differently? Would have you made a decision? You know,
oh my Lord! I'll tell you something. People ask me that. You know, somebody was talking to me the other day about Jerry Quarry and a few other fighters from that era. You know, and
right.
And when I was California heavyweight champion, I tried to get Quarry, and I was supposed to fight a couple times, and I just had too much left hand for him. And but Jerry was a great fighter. I mean, this kid he could fight. And I even said to him one time, listen, we'll fight 3 fights. I win 1, you win 1, then you're on your own. We'll make some money out of it. And he said, no, man. So anyway, when I started boxing, you got $10 a round to fight. There was no money, a lot of money in boxing in those days, and
if you couldn't fight amateur or didn't fight amateur, you probably had the option of fighting and not playing pro ball. But where did you develop your boxing skills?
I had some people that I was a tough kid in the street, and And I had a guy that, when I was a kid that taught me a lot about boxing, about, how to defend myself and stuff. And I had a minder around me that was from my father, and they taught me martial arts. I was doing martial arts in the 60s and judo and all kinds of things to defend myself in the street. You understand? And
okay, let's talk the streets a little bit. Most of the people that are listening do not know of your background. Tell us about your dad.
My father was kind of an infamous guy in America. He was a fellow called Albert Anastasia, and his real name was Umberto Anastasia, and he changed it to Anastasia so that it would differentiate him from his brothers, which was crazy because his brother Tony, he put into running the waterfront. He was the strength behind him. But Albert became one of the most infamous Italians to come into the country. He became head of Murder Incorporated, and he had his own family, which turned into the Gambino family after he was assassinated, and which is one of the biggest families in the 5 families.
Since you were on once before, I took the liberty of looking out for Albert Anastasia's documentaries on these channels that, report what happened in the mafia, this, that, and the other thing. Is there anything, I'd like to think, that your dad was portrayed in some way? He was actually portrayed as one of the most vicious human beings that I could remember hearing or reading about. And how much of that is fair? You said,
well, you gotta. I'll tell you this. I was a love child. Albert in the early 40s, when Louis Lipke was on trial, Albert, when they put Albert into the army to escape a lot of stuff, and he was in Indian Gap, Pennsylvania, training soldiers how to be longshoremen. He was a sergeant in the army, and he wasn't even a citizen, but they put him in the army. And one of the funniest stories about him that I ever heard, actually, he had a couple companies in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. So he was in the army, but he never spent a night at the army camp. He was down in Philadelphia every night because of the waterfront and stuff, and that's where he met my mother, and I was conceived. But when he was in Indian Gap, Pennsylvania, the captain of his platoon was reading the newspapers from New York and all, and his picture was all over the place because they were looking for him. Because Lipke was on trial, and then he was the head of Murder Incorporated at the time, and they're looking all over, where's this Albert Anastasia guy, blah, blah, blah. So he calls up the New York police, and he says, this Albert Anastasia guy that you all looking around for, he said, I have him here right in my army. And the guy on the other end of the phone said, who? He said, Albert Anastasia. You guys are looking all over for him. I read the newspapers. I have him here right in my army. And the guy said, hold on a minute. He came back on the phone a little bit while later, and he said, well, that's all bullshit. He said, we're really not looking for him. That's all newspaper stuff. And he hung the phone up. They had that kind of power. They were that strong. And he came out of the army, and after Lipke was executed, and he just went back up to New York and took up, where he left off.
If he came out with an honorable, I'll bet he got his citizenship.
He got it from that. They gave him his citizenship.
Yeah, my dad did as well. My dad escaped the war in the Germans, and
that's exactly correct. They gave him his citizenship, and So he came back on the streets, and he was pretty proud of being Sergeant Albert. But Albert came into the country when they all came in, and they all rose up at the same time, and they made an agreement as to what they wanted to do. You understand? And Albert was against drugs. And if you look at The Godfather, when Brando, they try to induce Rambo, The Godfather was made up of 5 different dons. And when they came to Brando to get in the drug business, and he said, if we touch it, it'll be the downfall of our families, and and our children will touch it. And my father said that. He said, there's no way. We didn't sign up for that. That's not what we're here for. So he was very much against it. And they kept telling him, Albert, it's only business. And Meyer, my father was very close with Meyer and Charlie, Luciana. And Charlie, of course, was deported, and he was living in Italy. And it was a whole different shakeup going on around the whole thing. And Gambino was a lieutenant of my father's, and he convinced Meyer that there was great business, and Meyer was a business guy. And the guy who really pushed the drug business was Genovese. And Guido Genovese was, when he was deported in the 30s, he set up the whole thing down in Sicily, where they set up the plants and everything. And he was under Mussolini, and they set up the plants to process heroin in Sicily. But they would say, "We'll never touch it. We'll just process it and make money and send it out." Blah 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 blah. And my father said, "This bullshit. It's just not. We're just not in. That's not our game." And so Genovese pushed it really hard. He came back. They let him back in the country, and he really was putting big figures on the table, how much they could make, and all this other stuff. But my father controlled all the ports, and he said, "You're not bringing that stuff in through not on my term." And right up to the night before they assassinated him. He sat in the hotel with Trafcanti and Carlos Marcellus, and they were begging him, "Please, Albert, it's only business. You know, why are you being so obstinate with this?" And he said, "No, it's not my deal, man." And they assassinated him the next day, and then Meyer Lansky oversaw my growth as a young man, and he sat me down one day and he told me, he said, it was the worst mistake we ever made. Because Albert was the glue. He held everything together. And when he was gone, then stuff just fell apart. You know, they went all different ways, and it was exactly what he said would happen. You know, they forgot how to make money. They started just making money off of drugs and women, and you know, they started opening up these bars and all this other stuff. And
Jack, as you were growing up, did he have an effect on your life? Did he come visit? Did he stay in touch with your mom?
No, I only met him once. I only saw him one time. He stayed in touch with my mother. I mean, he was very influential in my growth as a kid. I had a minder around me, a guy, but he was an Irish guy. And his brother was Tommy Collins, the famous soldier out of Ireland. His name was Rip Collins, and he was an engineer at General Electric, a very bright guy. And he's the one that introduced me to martial arts and everything, and he was around me all the time. The guy taught me a lot.
Who was O'Halloran?
That was my stepfather. My mother was married at a very young age in Philadelphia, but my mother made Jane Mansfield look like a child. You know, she was a very pretty woman. And she, you know, her and Albert hooked up, and when the war was on, Peter Paul was
So she was a single mom, and Mr. Halloran married her sometime later.
No, she was married to him when she met Albert. He was in.
Oh, okay.
Peter Paul was in he was in the service. He was in the Army Air Force, and he was away. You know, and she was in Philadelphia, and, you know, and she was a singer, and she sang in different clubs and stuff, and she met Albert in downtown Philly, and boom, I was a process of it.
Okay, yeah. Now he didn't take stuff out on you growing up.
No, nobody knew. You know, I never knew till I was like 14 years old when he was assassinated.
How did you find out? How did you come to find out?
I was playing football at West Catholic High School, a freshman in West Catholic, and these three guys came. That we played our freshman games right on the back of the school. We had a football field there, and these three guys came, you know, impeccably dressed. You know, when you didn't see people like I come to a freshman football game. And I thought they were scouts or something, you know. and I only met him once, and he was assassinated a couple months later. You know, and he was. I think I would have started a relationship with him, but he left me like 390 pages that he had written. He had a lawyer write all this stuff out. And told me a lot of things about different things and what was going to, and even predicted what was going to happen in the future of certain participants.
I don't even know the real definition of affection, but was there some shown when you guys met? Was it like a little hug?
It was almost like a hard to believe deal, you know. It just didn't.
So he just comes up and shocks you and says, "I'm your dad."
No, he was, you know, it was like an introducing thing here, you know, and some people explained some things to me, and I, you know, I had a lot of anger in me, and I was kind of angry at the fact that, you know, it's kind of a lead ball to drop on somebody, but, you know, I just worked my way through it. And, you know, after he was assassinated, then people really came and sat down with me and said, you know, this, and that, and, you know, and the man who was right next to me a lot of my young youth, Rip Collins, explained a lot to me, and he said, you know, this is the reason why I'm around you, this is the reason why you've been trained to do certain things, and this is the reason because you are who you are, and you are going to be something when you grow up, and you know, you have a lot of avenues in front of you to choose from, and
you had your athletic skills, and later your acting skills, but were you given an opportunity to follow your dad in the business that he chose?
Oh yeah. No, I was involved with a lot of people all the way up till, you know, I was what they clarify, a made individual when I was 19 years old, and I've lived under that oath all my life. You know, I believe in it. I believe in the course that they were taking, and I think that it's very sad that things were taken so far out of context. I think that, and then when you got to understand that there were a lot of changes that happened when the Kennedys got involved. Joe Kennedy was held under thumb for so long, and he hated being held under thumb, and he took a vengeance to expose organized crime and stuff, you know. And when Jack Kennedy was made president, and he turned around, he told Jack to make his brother Attorney General. And he told Bobby, he said, you put all my good friends in jail. And Jack Kennedy would have never became president if it wasn't for Giancana in Chicago and certain things that happened during his, even wouldn't have been nominated to be president if they hadn't done certain things. And
okay, now is all this is in your book? I'm assuming.
Yeah, a lot of it is. Yeah, when I've got 2 more books we're going to bring out, and it's a lot of it is. Yeah.
Okay, would you give the audience a chance to buy the book, and maybe even better than just buying it on Amazon or something? If somebody wants to have the book personalized, an autograph, or
they send it to me. There's an address off of Amazon. You can send it to me, and I would personalize it and send it back to you.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. That's I know there are a lot of folks that really like.
It's a great read, I'll tell you. The book, what I had done is I started with my father's death and I ended it with Kennedy's death, and I tell the truth about the Kennedy assassination.
Okay.
Which a lot of people
that said,
boozled over.
You were on one of the Dodgers shows, one of the New York shows, I think, a while back here on the network. And I listened to the interview. I might have even been part of the questioning on it. And there's one thing that you said that just, you basically said that one of the people that shot at Kennedy was the limousine driver, the Secret Service man.
He took the last shot. He took the last shot.
You know, I've gone back and looked at that film, and you don't see him.
Oh, you do. You do when you see the film with the 8 missing frames in it. Oh, yeah, you do. That's the 8 missing frames that they cut out of that film, and they've now been since. Actually, the FBI even put them on YouTube. God, a little while ago, because the guy, an NSA guy, put that whole film on YouTube. You're talking about the Zapruder film.
And there's those 8 frames show the the driver reach back and
turns. What he did was that the car you're talking about. If you look at the Zapruder film, okay,
right,
you'll see the Secret Service guys walk away from Kennedy's car to the back of the car, to the car behind it, and then you see them run up when the shot started. They're running back up to the car again. Okay, the whole thing. You're talking about 28 seconds. This whole thing took place. Okay,
right.
First shot that hit Kennedy hit him in the throat. And you see him grab his throat, and he falls forward. Well, the first shot actually hit Conley, and Conley falls down, and Kennedy falls right on top of him in the limousine. All right, and then Jack actually was shot in his lower back that they never talked about till about 15 years ago. That there was 3 shots that hit him, and then you see him fly backwards because when the shot started. Instead of speeding the limousine up, they slowed it down and they veered over to the left and cut off the motorcycle guy. And the driver just turned because Kennedy was right there between the seats, and he just turned and took the last shot when you see him fly backwards and the back of his head comes out. You understand? So
right.
The theory of the Oswald shot is so bogus because that would have hit him in the back and pushed him forward, not pulled him backwards.
Well, you just said that it just came out that he had been hit in the back.
He was hit in the lower back. But there were 13 shots fired that day. 13 shots. The first shot came out of a cauldron, and Johnny Roselli is the one who took the shot from Chicago. He hit him in the throat. And there was a cauldron along the right side of the road. You got to understand, first of all, it took them several months to reroute that route down Dealey Plaza, and you have to stop and think logically. Okay, the Byrd Building was owned by H.L. Hunt, the book depository. The anger in Texas about Jack Kennedy was phenomenal, and before Jack even went to Dallas, 4 people, one of them being Adlai Stevenson, went to Bobby Kennedy and said, do not let your brother go to Texas. The animosity down there is horrendous, and you should not even let him go down there. So you got to stop and look at all the pieces that were here. Bobby Kennedy was his brother's second skin. Everywhere he went, Bobby Kennedy was in his political stature, right? Mm-hmm. These people went to him and begged him, do not let your brother go to Texas. And Adlai Stevenson said, I was just in Houston. They were spitting at me. Bam, 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 the whole 9 yards. So Bobby didn't go before.
The Kennedys had kind of a self-entitlement thing where
you got to listen.
In their own mind, they seemed invincible.
Well, that's Joe Kennedy.
Stuff like
Joe Kennedy thought he was invincible, is correct.
Right.
And he was under thumb. But you got to go all the way back to the beginning. Joe Kennedy was under thumb by Chicago from the 20s. He was a bootlegger. Okay? He had a factory up in Canada with the guy from Fleischmann's Liquor out of Newark, New Jersey. And Joe Kennedy's stepfather was Honey Fitzgerald, one of the most powerful guys out of Boston. And he controlled all the liquor of Scotland and England. They brought all the booze over. And they took it into Canada, and then they were bringing it down into America, bootlegging it in the 20s. And Joe Kennedy was involved in a bootlegging operation because he was about money. And Joe was one of the smartest banking guys. He was the youngest president of a bank in the history of America. But he got into the bootlegging business because of money. And he brought, there was a load of booze coming down from Canada, and he had some people hijacked it, but it belonged to the Purple Gang. And when they found out who hijacked the liquor, he found out who hijacked it. They said, "You're a dead man, son." And he ran back to Honey Fitzgerald, and he begged. He said, "What am I going to do?" And he said, "I can't help you. There's only one guy in this country that can help you against those people, and that was Joe Esposito in Chicago, who was one of the first dons of Chicago." And he went out to see him, and Joe said, "You know what? You're a good earner, kid. I like you. You go back to Boston. I'll take care of the Purple Gang, but you belong to me now." And he was under thumb with Chicago ever since that day. And they, in fact, the only money that he ever put into a building in America was the Mercantile Building in Chicago. They made him build it. But they sent him, there was a place called the Harrison Club in Illinois, it was in Chicago. It was a political stronghold. And they sent him out to California. They introduced him to Randolph Hearst. He was instrumental in RKO. He put together the movie theaters for the distribution of RKO Studios. You look under the paperwork. And that's what it was about, was getting the movies out. Oh, yeah, well, Chicago controlled the Cinematographers Union. So they controlled the movie business. And they sent him out there, and he met this person, that person, blah, 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 and then there was a whole sequence of things that Joe Kennedy did that they supported and they put him behind. He was instrumental in the crash of 29.
When did it come to the point? Was it after John was elected president?
John became president. He said to Bob,
and he turns on, Joe Kennedy turns on your folks.
100%. He thought he had the power of powers now, and he could do whatever he wanted. And then you got to understand that when Joe Kennedy was ambassador to England, when they sent him over to become ambassador of England, he was told by people in Chicago, when you go there, we want you to sit down with some friends of ours, and we're going to tie some strings together. And the first guy he ever sat down was the Shah of Iran, and they built a bank, and the bank lent money to Hitler. And then Hitler came back to the same group, had a guy named Khashoggi. He was buying arms from him. But America wasn't in the war yet, and Kennedy didn't think, well, he's just making a lot of money. And England came up and said, "Hey, guy, you can't. You're supporting our enemy," and they threw him out of England. But no one ever knew why they threw him out, because there was no television then, and the radio was controlled, and the newspapers were controlled. The Gore family owned the newspapers on the East Coast from Indiana, and Hearst had them on the West Coast. So he was covered. No one ever printed a story as to why he actually came home. He came home as Ambassador Joe Kennedy.
Well, there have been rumors through the years that he was playing both ends against the middle with Hitler.
Well, he did. They had a bank. They were lending him money.
Well,
and then you got to understand. I tell you, the process of things. If people really sat down and unwound it, they would find everything is there in black and white. They were blowing up submarines. Submarines were blowing up convoys going down the coastline to support the war. And we weren't in the war yet. This is one of the reasons why Albert, that's how they got Charlie Luciano out of jail. Because the submarines were right off of our coastline. And the information was coming out of the New York harbors because of the Sicilian fishermen there. And they were leaking information as to what the activities were. And the German submarines were boom, 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 banging people out. And when they wanted to get Charlie out of jail, they came to Meyer Lansky and my father, and they begged for help. How do they stop this leaking of information out of the New York harbors?
Isn't it interesting that the government is coming to you guys when they need you the most?
Oh, that's how Charlie wound up. That's how Charlie wound up living in Italy. Because Dewey hated him, and Dewey's the one that put him away. And when they let him out, Dewey said, that's bullshit. He's never coming back to New York. So he got as far as Havana, Cuba, and Dewey had him deported. And when they actually went to Charlie's immigration hearings, the government came forth and said this guy was a hero. What he did, I mean, when they invaded Sicily, it was the least. You ever look up the history of the war, Second World War, you'll find that the invasion of Sicily was the cleanest invasion they ever had. They walked through Italy like a candy bar. He gave them locations.
Like Grant went through Richmond.
He gave them everything that they needed. Okay? And that was supposed to be his ticket to come back to New York. Charlie wanted to walk the streets of New York again. And they promised him that if he helped them with the invasion of Sicily, he would come back to New York. And Dewey blocked that because he got to Havana, and when he was working his way up to New York, they'd send him back again. And then they went to him for Anzio. And he said, what are you going to do, make me some more promises that you won't keep? You promised me that I could walk to New York. I gave you what you wanted. Now you're asking me for help again, and you're going to make me more false promises? Forget about it. And they got killed in Anzio because he wouldn't help them.
Whoa.
Understand?
Yeah.
The government itself.
Your stuff is so revealing. I'm a Jew boy. Tell me how the Jews and the Italians got along in the mafia. What?
Meyer Lansky, when they all came in the early 1900s, they all were street kids, gangs together, you know. And Meyer and Bugsy Siegel had their gang, and Charlie Luciana, and you know, they all had their gang. Pravacci, Joe Adonis, they all had their gang.
The five families, right?
Yeah. Well, the five families weren't formed until 1930. These were kids out of 5 Points, New York, and they were different gangs, street gangs, and stuff like that. And they were just coming up, and they came up together, and they formed a relationship. And you have to understand that Jewish people in America did something they never did anywhere else. They were killers. Murder Incorporated was 80% Jewish. Louis Buckhalter Lipke was a Jewish kid, and he ran the garment district. And he and my father were head of Murder Incorporated.
Well, there were more Jews than Italians in more. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then they turned around, and when Buckhalter, Louis made a bad mistake. There was a guy who became the very first rat in all of the history of Boom, and Abe Rellis, and he put away 11 guys on death row. He opened the door to Murder Incorporated, which was the most amazingly put together organization. These guys were all across the country, and they never talked on phones. It was the way they set it up was brilliant. Anyway, Buckhalter and Rellis got into an argument, and he gave Louis.
Well, they've been talking about how'd they get information to each other? Don't tell me anything specifically, please. But,
they mailed stuff. They mailed envelopes to people, and people showed up and gave envelopes to people.
Okay.
They had people in every city. Okay, and the story goes even deeper than that. But they when Buckhalter, he gave a beating to Abe Rellis, and he should have killed him, but he beat him badly, and he scared him to death, and he ran to the cops. And he was the first witness protection program guy. They had him held up in a hotel on Coney Island, and he was there for 2 years ratting, and the guys were being put away, and this and that and the other thing. And the night before he was supposed to go on trial against my father. Now here's a guy he's under witness protection program. They're watching him 24/7 at this hotel. He went out the window. And to this day, no one's ever been accused of how he died, other than the fact that he went out a window. And the police say, well, he put some sheets together and he was trying to climb out of the building, and he gained a lot of weight being locked up in this hotel for 2 years, and he fell. Well, The funny part is he was 20 feet away from the building, and he hit ass first, so he was chucked out the window, okay? And he never showed up at my father's hearing, so my father walked away. That's the pure fact of it, you know. And he was, but he put away 11 people who were executed and did life and stuff like that, and it caused a big ripple in things.
Jack, did you? Let me get back to this 1 second because my mind goes from hither to yon. Did your stepfather ever find out that you were not his?
No. He had an inclination, but it was never really stated or talked about.
Okay, so he died. He deceased your natural dad, Albert.
No, he died when I was 19. My father was assassinated when I was 14. He died when I was 19. He had a cerebral hemorrhage and died.
Okay, so I'm just how. And your mom, did she take? She took this information to the grave, I guess.
Well, no, I have a lot of documents that she had notarized and stuff, and and there was a lot of disclosure as to who I am, where I came from, and because it's never really been questioned. And people say, "Well, you're going to write this book, and everybody's going to," and no one's ever stepped forward and said that what is being talked about is untrue, because I knew the family, but I never associated with anybody. I associated with people in the streets of New York. I knew everybody up there, New York and New England. In fact, I think I'm one of 4 living people, maybe only 3 now, 2, that have ever been across the country, and I met every one of the old Dons. I knew them all.
Oh, wow.
I knew Giancana well. I knew Marcellus well. I knew Trafcanti. I went across the country and I met everybody.
What a trip that had to be. Now,
it was an education.
I want to know the lowdown on boxing and whether or not all the rumors is boxing fixed. What?
In the old days, boxing. Frankie Carbo controlled boxing in New York big time. He was Frankie Carbo was supposed to be my father. He was supposed to be the next guy like my father, and they put him away. And it was over boxing that they put him away, over a fight that happened in L.A. Frankie Carbo was a powerful guy, boy, and he controlled the boxing situation out of New York and mostly the country. And boxing's always had figures in it that had a lot of control, but you wouldn't say fights were fixed. You would say that people were overmatched with people.
Okay.
And there was.
Hey, well, speaking of that, was the Liston punch Phantom? The Ali Liston.
No. People don't look at history. What really happened there, and when they were supposed to fight the first time, and Muhammad Ali had a hernia, and they called the fight off, and he had a hernia. I mean, that's just the way it was. And Liston was managed by a guy called Sam Margolis out of Philadelphia and a man named Blinky Palermo. And when that happened, Sam's wife was going through a brain tumor surgery, and the only person Liston ever listened to was Sam Margolis. He was the head of the Jew mob in Philadelphia, and Liston was scared to death of him. He used to live in Sam's cellar when they first started managing him, and Liston never went back to camp. He stopped training. Took his wife to camp when he went to camp, and he never trained really right for the second fight. And Liston, you got to understand Charlie Liston. Charlie Liston never liked seeing his own blood.
Well, who does? I mean,
but when he got cut, he was an animal in the ring as far as certain aspects of it. But one day the whole truth will come out about it. But he, I mean, even the way he died and everything. But when you're talking about a man who weighs 220 pounds and has the speed that Ali had, and he's punching down and Liston was coming up, and he hit him. And he hit him a legitimate shot.
Okay.
You got a guy 220 pounds punching down at you with rapid speed, and you have a guy that was weaving away and ducking and coming up, and he ran right into the punch. And he got hit. But when he quit on the stool, that was a different story. Ali cut him in the second round under his eye, and they even put liniment on Liston's gloves that where Ali was rubbing his eyes in the fifth round and he couldn't see. And then Charlie sat on a stool in the seventh round and said, I can't continue because I threw my shoulder out, which was a bunch of bullshit. He was getting beat and he knew it. So you got to
get into acting. How'd you transform yourself from a boxer to an actor?
It's a great story. They did a guy named Steve McQueen did a movie called Thomas Crown Affair in Boston.
Great movie, by the way.
And I was
when you talk about people not knowing what, not being able to be caught because they didn't know each other.
It was a great film. It was a great, and he was a great kid, and he came to Boston to do the picture. Well, we took care of him. We looked after him up there. I was starting boxing up there. I had started in Philadelphia. I had my first half dozen fights in Philadelphia, and then I got into a problem, and they shipped me out of Philadelphia and sent me to Boston. And so I'm up in Boston, and I'm just in the beginning of my career, and I'm involved with some serious people up there, good friends, and when McQueen was sent out there, we more or less watched over him and took care of him. And he and I used to sit down and chit chat and shoot the shit. And he said, "Man," he said, "you gotta come down on the set. I want to put you in the movie, and you gotta come back to Hollywood, Jack. We'll have a ball, man. We'll have the best time." And because Steve was a great kid. And I said, man, that's not for me. He said, no, I'm telling you, man. Come on, get out of here. Let's come to California. And I said, I don't think so. So he went back and in 1968, I knocked out Manuel Ramos, who was ranked number 2 in the world.
And he was doing bullet at that time.
He was doing, I forget he was doing something. He used to call me on the phone all the time. You got to come out. Well, in 1968, after the Ramos fight, I get a phone call. And I found out that Raymond put it together, Raymond Patriarca. They brought me out to Hollywood to do The Great White Hope, which was the biggest picture in Hollywood at the time with James Earl Jones. He was doing Jack Johnson. And they said, and Eddie Foy III was putting the whole thing together. So they said, just sign the contract. You're going to go and play Jess Willard, and you're going to go down to Spain for 6 months and all this jazz. And so I came out and met the producer, and this guy's giving me, and Gambino's nephew was in California working in the gyms, and he said, and he was involved, and he said, tell him I'm your manager. They'll put 10% on for me, and blah, blah, blah. So the whole thing, all I had to do was sign the papers. So I sat down with this producer, and the guy's telling me what they're going to do. He said, we're going to take you to Spain for 6 months, and we're going to pay you, I think it was $1,500 a week, and that was a lot of money back in the 60s. And Mushi Callahan was the boxing coordinator. He was a Ma-Bone fighter. And he said, man, this would be great, Jack. You're going to have a good time, blah, 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 blah. And I looked at the producer, and I said, you're going to give me what? What are you paying me? He said, we'll pay you $1,500 a week. And I said, I give that away in tips. I said, and I don't think that this 6 months going to Spain. I said, listen, there's a guy up in St. Paul, Minneapolis. His name is Jim Beattie. He just retired from boxing. He needs a job. He's got 6 kids to feed. Give him a call. And the guy said, you're turning us down? And he said, I thought this deal was all done. I thought all you had to do was sign. What are we doing here, gentlemen? And everybody was looking around like crazy, like, what's wrong with you, man? So just sign the goddamn paper. And I just said no. And I got up and walked out, and Eddie Foy was standing outside the door shaking. He said, you're going to get this whacked? Are you crazy? What are you doing? I said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of the East Coast. I said, it's not for me, this business. And to show you how fast things run around, you know, I was coming out of Fox, coming down the front steps, and James Earl Jones is coming up the steps, and he stopped me in the middle, and he said, "You're Jack O'Halloran?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is it true what I just heard about you?" And I said, "Well, it depends on what you heard." He said, "You just told Hollywood to take the biggest movie out there and stick it." I said, "Wow." I said, "You know, if you want to look at it that way, I guess." He said, "I got to shake your hand. I never met anybody that told Hollywood to piss off." And so we became friends. So I left, and then McQueen called me on the phone. "What is the matter with you?" I said, "Man, I'm not ready for this shit. You know, and it's not my deal." So I went back, you know, and
what was the real reason? I mean, looking back, was it a fear of you really weren't ready, that you needed seasoning?
Oh no, I should have done it. No. I was just too heavy involved in the street and stuff, and I just knocked out this number 2. I'm getting ready to fight Ali. I thought I was going to get a title shot. You know.
Tell us about, you came very close to getting beat
4 times. We were signed 4 times. We were signed 4 different times. It never happened. In fact, he was supposed to fight me when he fought Norton. When he fought Norton, he and I had an agreement. We sent telegrams back and forth, and I had a deal. A guy just built the arena in San Diego, a Canadian guy, and he was going to promote the fight, and they gave Ali a hell of a deal, and they turned around and Kenny Norton was owned by 2 of the wealthiest guys in San Diego. Bob Byron, he owned half of La Jolla and a lot of other things, and Art Rifkin owned Coca-Cola and a few other things, and they went to Chicago with a suitcase with $3 million, and Herbert gave it to Herbert Muhammad, and Norton was fighting Ali, and Ali called me on the phone, and he was crying. He said, "I am so sorry, man." And we made a deal because he had a brother named Rockman who was a fighter. And I was fighting Rockman in San Diego, and I get a phone call from Gene Kilroy, who was a dear friend of mine for years, and he was the closest white man to Ali. And he and Ali were in a car in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they called me on the phone. And he said, "Jack Muhammad wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." So he said, "You got to do me a favor." I said, "I'll do you a favor. Sign a contract for me to fight." And he said, "I promise you we'll fight each other, but you got to do me this favor. You got to get my brother out of boxing." I said, "Your brother? Who's your brother?" He said, "Rockman Ali." I said, "The kid I'm fighting next week?" He said, "Yeah, you got to get him out of boxing for me. Do me a favor." It's like an embarrassment to me. And I said, "Okay." So I said to myself, I better go in the gym and train a couple days, because I used to take fights on a day's notice. I was nuts. I could fight. So I go in the gym, and I knocked this kid out, and he never fought again. I knocked him out in the 9th round, and he never fought again. And Norton got the fight. You know, Norton's people went up and paid the money, and boom. And the deal, the first
had
deal.
You beaten Norton before? That's the key question.
Kenny Norton and I fought.
Had you already beaten Norton when Ali fought Norton?
Well, here's the deal. Norton and I fought in 1972. God, 1972. Jeez. 2 days before St. Patrick's Day. I think it was in March. And I was on the East Coast, and I had 14 indictments against me for union stuff and a whole bunch of other stuff. And, they called me on the phone. The guy said, "Do you want to fight Ken Norton?" I said, "Who?" He said, "Ken Norton." I said, "Where?" He said, "San Diego." I said, "When?" He said, "Next week." I said, "Send me a ticket." The guy said, "You'll take the fight?" I said, "Send me a ticket." He said, "You'll take the fight with Norton?" I said, "Send me a ticket." So a week before, it was actually like 10 days, I fly out to San Diego, and I train 4 days for the fight. You know, and I gave Norton a licking. I mean, people were standing on their chairs. It was one of the best heavyweight fights they had seen in California in a long time. So, in the 9th round, we were just toe to toe going at it, and they rang the bell 4 times, and they finally the referee finally heard the bell, and he jumped in between us and separated us. And I was walking back to my corner, and Norton ran across the ring and hit me behind the head and drove me into the corner post. And the commissioner jumped up into the ring, and he said to me, "If you can't continue, you just won the fight." And I said, "Continue? I'm going to kill this guy." I was so mad. I wasn't thinking I should never. My corner guy should have said, "Just sit the hell down there, man. You ain't going nowhere. So you just won the fight." And I said, "Like hell, I'll go out. I'm going to kick this guy's ass." And I went out in the 10th round. I'm saying, "What am I doing? I'm in his backyard." And so the fight went the distance. He got a split decision, but I won the city. The city, because they knew I'd beat him. I'd beat him, getting the worst beating he ever had. I cut his eyes. I beat him pretty bad. So I stayed in San Diego. I never went back to the East Coast. I stayed there, and I knocked out a half dozen guys, and I became California heavyweight champion. And Norton and I kept, Ali and I kept talking. And the first Norton fight was a fiasco because he didn't train really well for that fight, and he had a tooth removed in his head the week before the fight, and Norton hit him a fluky shot and cracked the tooth next to it, and the crack went all the way down and broke Talie's jaw. And he fought.
Wow.
He fought the fight. That happened in the 4th round. He couldn't open his mouth after the 5th round. And they wanted to stop. Freddie Pacheco said, "Let's stop the fight." Ali said, "You stop this fight, you won't walk out of this arena. You ain't stopping this fight." And that's when he got my vote. In fact, I am the one who got him to the hospital, the Claremont General Hospital, through Dr. Lundeen, the same guy that made me get the test done for acromegalia, was the commission doctor, and he set up to get the guy to fix Ali's jaw. And I went back into the dressing room after the fight, and I said, and he looked at me, and he said, "Jack, well, what hospital?" And I told him, I said, and Herbert then said, "Well, get this white boy out of here." And Ali said, "You shut up and listen to everything he tells you and take me exactly where he tells you to take me." And he went to Claremont General, and they fixed his face. And it was funny because I used to go up and see him every day. And one day I went in the hospital, and he had a heavy bag in there. I said, what is that for? He said, "You got to hang around, man. Don't go nowhere. Just hang around." And Norton came in to see him. And Kenny and I was always trying to get him back in the ring again. So Kenny came in, he saw me, and he said, "Oh, hey, man, what's happening?" And Ali said, "Take that bag. That's yours. I got that there for you. I want you to go and start training, son, because you and I are going to see each other again."
Wow.
I loved Ali. Ali was great.
That's a great story.
I loved Ali. Ali was a gas, man. He was a great athlete. And I remember when I beat Alvin Blue Lewis, who was ranked. In fact, Alvin Blue Lewis fought Ali in Ireland and went 13 rounds with him. The kid from Detroit. And they called me up and asked me if I wanted to fight Alvin Blue Lewis. And California had taken my boxing license away for organized crime. And I said to the guy, "Well, I haven't got my license back yet." I said, "Can you give me a license in Michigan?" He said, "Absolutely. Will you take the fight?" I said, "Absolutely." So I went to Michigan, and I beat this kid to death. Yeah, he never fought a guy. I beat him terrible. And and I went up to camp. Ali had his camp in Pennsylvania, so I went up to see him after the fight, trying to get him back in the ring again. And he sat me down. We sat down, and we were getting ready to eat some at his training camp. And he looked at me and he said, "Listen, if I give you a fight, are you really going to try to beat me?" I said, "I'll tell you what." I said, "Let me tell you something." I said, "You sign a paper for me to fight you. I'll tell you what. I'm going to go do something I never have done in my career. I'm going to go to a camp, and I'm going to get in the greatest shape I was ever in my life. And you better bring a gun in the ring when you come in the ring with me, sunshine." And he looked at me and he said, "2 steaks, please." He was a character, man. I loved him. He was great. Ali was a good guy.
That's great. Did you and Norton ever kind of make up?
Well, Kenny was
in the back.
Kenny was all right.
Each in the back of the head.
So
you're never going to be great friends.
We almost fought in Tahoe, actually, I think it was. They wanted me to fight him in Tahoe, and I had pulled a bicep muscle. and I couldn't do the fight, and so he fought Henry Clark instead. But that was the last time, and he. I don't know, Kenny was a good kid.
I meant not as competitors. Did you make up as?
No. We talked to each other. Yeah. Kenny and I became friends. I mean, I liked Kenny. His son was a nice kid. His kid was a good kid. And he
good
became,
football
and he is
player.
still, and he's still coaching.
Yes, he is. Yes,
I remember when he was a little kid.
Wow.
Kenny was a good guy. Kenny was a victim of Kenny, and it was no big deal. It was, but he was whatever. So it's water under the bridge.
All right. Anything about Liston that we don't know about as
Charlie?
Yeah.
Charlie
was Sonny Liston.
Charlie was his own worst enemy.
How did he get that nickname, Sonny?
He gave him that years ago, and he was Sam Margolis.
Not his disposition, I'm assuming.
Well, Liston was a bit of a weird dude, man. He was a very tough guy in the ring, but he wasn't a street fighter. You understand? He wasn't as tough. He was not as tough outside as he was inside the ring, and he thought he was. And he hung around with wise guys, so he thought that he could do whatever he wanted, and he bullied a lot of people. He wouldn't come near me, and it was Sam Margolis had my
I'm talking to a guy who says Sonny Liston wouldn't come near me. That is, I feel like this is a good interview from Charlie
Liston killed himself. Charlie's wife, Jolene, was the nicest woman in the world, and they were living in Vegas. And his fight, just to show you, one of his last fights was against Leotis Martin. And I'm sitting ringside, and Leotis was from Philly, and Leotis was a very good fighter. Frazier would never fight him either. Leotis was a good heavyweight, and he's fighting Liston, and he cut Liston badly, and Liston's bleeding through his nose, which he's swallowing the blood. And in the ninth round, Leotis hit him a shot, and Liston went down. And I'm sitting right at ringside, and I watched that bum pick his head up and put his glove under it and lay it down on his glove. While he counted him out. That was the last fight he had. And then he got involved he was involved with drugs. He thought he was a street guy. But after the Leotis Martin fight, what he was doing, he was taking front money from promoters in Vegas and not showing up for fights. So they called back to the East Coast, and the East Coast finally said, you know what, you're on your own, kid. We're not protecting you any longer. You're not involved with us. Boom, gone. And he made a deal with some drug dealers, and Charlie Liston never did drugs. This is the whole fallacy of his death. He never did drugs, but he made this deal that he was going to do this big heroin deal with some people, and he was supposed to have the money, and they were going to bring the drugs, and anyway. So his wife, for the very first time, went away for the weekend and left him by himself, which never happened. And they put a needle in his arm and they shot him up and made it look like he OD'd. But Charlie never did drugs. He was afraid of needles, scared shitless of needles. And
I got a scoop right there, because there are a lot of people that think he died of an overdose, which he did.
Charlie never.
But
he killed him. He killed him the same way they killed Big Daddy, the way they killed Lipscomb, the football player in Baltimore.
Oh, Gene Big Daddy Lipscomb was.
Yeah, they killed him because he was running around with a white girl. Yeah, he was running around with a white girl, and they told him to stop, and he said, "Go to hell," and they said, "Okay," and they found him in a hotel room dead.
Whoa. Now, who killed, like a Klan thing? He was with a white girl?
Oh, he was with a white Italian girl. And he was told to stop.
Okay. I got you.
Told to stop. And he just told everybody, "Go to hell with you. I'm who I am. You can't tell me." And they said, "Yeah, really? Okay."
Yeah.
That was the end of his career.
Well, I'm assuming Gino Marchetti was never with a black woman along the same.
I don't think so. Not in those days.
Okay. Fair is fair, you know. If you can't have it both ways.
They didn't play tic-tac in it, you know. It was,
yeah.
It was, you know, just a whole different change of times, and the world was changing, and, you know, it's just, it is what it is, you know.
Jack, after all these years, what made you finally decide to put your book together? And
well, I had
more
to wait
than that
for,
one book.
I had to wait for. I got 2 more, probably 3 more coming. I had to wait for certain people to pass away because I didn't want them to ever be put on a griddle. So I did, you know. But I was educated to write that book. I mean, I learned a lot of things. I knew a lot of things. And I was around a lot of people, and it's time that the truth is told. You know, there's a lot of.
Did anybody ever come to you and say, "Don't write the book"?
No. In fact, all my friends want it written. They want the truth told, and you know, people have said that to me. Weren't you afraid you'll get killed? Da, 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 da. I said, from who? Who's going to kill me? What, are you crazy? What are you talking about? You know, and when I did the deal, you know, the government did not want me to publish the book in America. They didn't want me to write a autobiography. They didn't want me to write a nonfiction book, you know, and because they said we'll never get it printed in America. And I remember sitting down with a deal with them. I had all the 3 fascists together, and so we came to a compromise that I would write what they call a fractional book. You know, I put maybe 15-20% fiction, and the rest is truth. And they said, yeah, that's good, that's fine, because then you'll confuse everybody, and we like confusing people. So.
Yeah, they do. This is the government talking.
But you gotta read. If you read it, you'll understand. The book reads very well. It's a very well written book. It actually came out very well. Not because I wrote it, but it just came out well.
Okay.
And I'm getting ready to develop it into a series in films, and I'm going to do the other books, and we're going to. It's time.
I talk to a lot of authors, and I find that the relationship between authors and editors is incredibly interesting and incredibly diverse. Some authors don't get much input from editors. Some authors go to war with their editors in the process of putting the book together. Did you fall somewhere in between?
Yeah.
You had experience?
Yeah, we were just trying to get a publishing deal done, and the people that were going to publish it, I went to the big publishers, and they wanted me to do it nonfiction. I said I can't do that. And then they wanted me to get certain people to sit behind a screen, you know, and say that this is true, but we can't, you know. And I said that ain't going to happen. I said, you know, you're asking people to come out and get themselves put into harm's way. I wouldn't do that, and because there's, you know, certain things have no statute of limitations on them. I said, we're just not going. I'm not going to jeopardize anybody like that. So we wrote it the way it is, and the guy who was publishing it had an editor that he took things out of it that he shouldn't have taken out of it. Like I could send you the real manuscript, and it's much different than what the book is, and it's not really far off. It just there's certain things that should have been in there that aren't, but they're going to be when I revitalize it, and that's just what I'm about to do.
Could you give me and the audience an idea of an example of that? What would have you preferred to not to?
Well, there's just certain connections with the flow of things. It flows really good. It's a great read. It's a great read the way it is, but there's certain things where people say, well, what happened here and what happened there? Well, those answers were in the original manuscript, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take.
So it became confusing.
A little bit, yeah. Well, only if you really knew the world, you know. Like it's funny if you read the reviews on Amazon. There's a 90-year-old guy from New York who wrote a great review. He said, you know. He said, I've been waiting for something like this to happen for so long. He said, and and you can take to the bank that 70% or better of this book is actually very true and accurate, and the real names are being used. And he said, and I know this because I lived it. So
wow.
One of the things about the series, which is going to be good, is that you'll have an audience from 16 to 90, because grandfathers have told these stories through, generation to generation. Stories carry from one end to another, and this will allow people to talk to each other again. And when I first wrote it, I gave it to 4 high school kids, and I gave it to them to read, and they read it, and they ran to the library to look up all the names, and came back to me and said, how come they don't teach us this in school? Because there's a lot of history. The book, in other words, Family Legacy.
Well, just the history with with Joe Kennedy.
Well,
and,
Family Legacy isn't just a mob story. What it is a story about how the government, industry, unions, and organized crime were all partners for years. They were partners for years. I mean, you couldn't do anything without the other. And what it tells is how the illicit monies that were made by organized crime was put back into the growth of a country. They invested in companies. They invested in the insurance companies. They invested in Sears and Roebuck was underwritten by organized crime. They invested in General Electric. They invested in, they created the unions. They created jobs for people. In other words, if you were in the 20s and 30s and stuff, where gambling and loan sharking and extortion were their money sources, how could you pay the gambling debts if you weren't working? So they made sure you had a job. And they controlled all the unions. You understand? So they put money into the economy, and they helped the growth of the country. I mean, if you go across the country and open it up as to how it opened up, it would be mind-boggling to a lot of people, because they were thrown under the
violence that we read about and see in the documentaries. It was kept within
the families. Within the family. They never killed innocent people. They never killed innocent people. Let me tell you, and I say this to people. I'll ask somebody, how old are you? You're 70? How old are you?
71.
Okay, so you were raised in New York, yeah?
Right.
Okay, what part of New York were you raised in?
Coincident, I was from Queens, Jackson Heights.
Okay, you're from Queens, all right. So you never locked your front door when you were a kid, did you?
No. Well, actually, we lived in a co-op.
Okay, but what I'm saying to you is that were there any drive-by shootings in your neighborhood?
It wasn't. The world wasn't like it is.
Were there
now.
any drive-by shootings in your neighborhood?
No, there were we lived in a quiet neighborhood. We had drive-by knifings in my neighborhood. No, I'm kidding, Jack. Once in a while a joke.
What I'm saying to you, in other words, babies could be left on the pram in front of the house. Nobody bothered them. Nobody broke into your home. Nobody.
You're absolutely right. The 50s
neighborhoods were controlled. The neighborhoods were controlled. The old Dons lived in their neighborhoods, and they made sure the people in their neighborhoods were safe. Yes, no?
Yes. Very good point.
A whole different era, a whole different job. I said, and I tell people that. I said, you want to see the difference? Ask somebody who's 60 years or older wherever they lived in America. They never locked their front doors.
Touch on this for me, the relationship between cops and robbers, or how it was back then between the cop on the street.
You got to understand something. Organized crime never touched drugs. They weren't in the drug business, and that's only certain factions of them. But they were, and overall, they weren't pushing heroin. They weren't pushing drugs. They were
gambling, numbers, that sort of thing.
That's all gambling, numbers, and they made a deal with they guys turned their head away this way. People got paid. Everybody made money out of it. Everybody made money.
Right.
And they never killed innocent people. They never did things against the innocent people. If they were hijacking trucks, it was against corporations. If they were I mean, you got to understand that the unions were a joke because one side would pay you not to unionize, and the other side paid to be unionized. I mean, it was a win-win situation. It was, but there was an understanding that was there. There were understandings all across the board.
Do you still consider it to be the most honest profession on that level, that they are so clear with everything that there are no surprises, nothing? If you're going to get hit, you know the reason why.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's changed. Let me say this. Has it changed in the last? Yeah, it's changed a lot, and a lot of foolishness and stupidity and stuff like that, and that's all because it's just like my father says. That's drugs that did that, the drug business, the lure of money, and it wasn't even. I mean, the government was as much involved in drugs as anybody was. So you could go through certain tiers of things and learning processes and everything, and it would mind boggle you. We could sit here and talk for hours, and I could explain certain things that would be mind boggling to you. And you would sit, and then you would think about it, and you would say, "My God, that's actually true." I sat and watched that, and no one ever said a word, because that's what happens. That's exactly what happened.
Now, let me ask you: were there things in place back in your day, your dad's day, that are still in place now that people go,
yeah, they just went legitimate.
This, that, and the other thing.
They went legitimate. There's guys that did things, and they still control certain powers, but they do it legitimately.
Okay.
I mean, you look at where did Chrysler Corporation come from? Who was running Chrysler Corporation for years? An Italian guy that came from Sicily, out of a little village, and rose right to the top of Chrysler. Yeah?
Right.
Why did he do that? Because he had control over all the unions. When he was running Chrysler, there was never a strike. No one even think about striking.
Right.
They got rid of Hoffa because he controlled too much voting power, and the Kennedys hated him. And Jimmy was a man's man. I liked Jimmy Hoffa. I liked him a lot, actually. But he was his own worst enemy as well, and it was sad. And what they put him in jail for was the most ludicrous thing in the world. To say that he took $8,000 and fixed his house up out of the pension fund when there was no pension fund until Jimmy Hoffa came along. And Jimmy Hoffa didn't have to rob $8,000 from the pension fund. Believe me when I tell you that. Jimmy was a man's man. Jimmy would never ask you to do what he wouldn't do himself. So he started the Teamsters. And he was, but his problem was, he thought he was going away for just a few months, and he wound up going away for a few years. And his childhood friend, Fitzsimmons, who stepped in to take over the union, they scared the shit out of him by blowing up his kid's car. And the government got involved in the union. The government infiltrated the Teamsters, and like it did a lot of other unions. And Hoffa came home and he said, "I'm taking my union back." He walked in his office. He told Fitzsimmons to get out of his chair, and Fitzsimmons said, "Jimmy, you can't come in here. You're going to get us all busted. You signed documents stating that you wouldn't come near the union for X amount of time. And you can't just walk in here like that." He said, "Bullshit, this is my union. This union belongs to me. I created it. It's mine. Get out of my desk." And he made a phone call to New York. And that phone call he was his own worst enemy. I mean, he said certain things, and
I'm going to go to the press.
And that's the last thing he said. When he said, "I'm going to the press," the guy hung the phone up, and that was the end of Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
And it was sad because I kind of liked him. I really did. I liked him a lot. And they're never going to find him. He's not buried anywhere. It's all fallacy. There was a guy from Chicago who was in jail who lived he had a farm in Illinois, and his father was his father, he was in jail, and his father was ill, and they needed somebody to help plow the place up, and he told the law that Hopper was buried in his father's farm. They went and dug up the whole farm.
That's
a
beautiful
true story. That's a true story. They went and dug the whole farm up. They tilled all the land for the father. It was great.
Jack, we have a time problem, but I'm going to ask you one key question.
Yeah.
Are there any sports other than boxing that are more affected by gambling than one would think?
Highlight. Horse racing. All the tracks.
Right.
It's the tracks, and you can look in corners everywhere. There's a dark corner everywhere you look. There's always somebody doing something that shouldn't be being done. But as far as an organized control factor over certain things, I wouldn't think so. I mean, this stuff they do, this MFM, MAA boxing bullshit, which to me is total child's play. And that was just exposed when that guy McGregor or whatever was going to fight, was fighting with Mayweather. That was a joke. I mean, the guy was running out of gas in the second round. He was beat before he got in the ring. No way was he ever going to beat a Mayweather.
Okay, real quick, let's go back to the editing thing. You mentioned that there were things that were taken out of the book that kind of ruined the continuity, or you would have preferred to put them in. Is there anything that was left in that you would prefer to have been taken out in retrospect?
No.
Okay, you don't have any regrets about anything you said?
Oh, no, God, no. In fact, I
love that answer. I've only gotten that answer from one other, without qualification. Well, I might have done this, might have done that, but I've only gotten that answer from one other author, and that was Peter Golenbach. He says, no, I write it. It's, I believe it. I don't go back on it. So that tells me a lot. You have no regrets about.
Oh no, God no. In fact, I wish I kicked myself in the butt for not telling more, and that's why I'm going to do the other books. And I'm going to do. I got probably 3 more books. I'm going to take the book I have and I'm going to redo it. Excuse me, and add 6 chapters that should have been in there, and make 2 books out of it. Yeah, and then we're going to do a 3rd and a 4th book. And then I'm going to write a book about Lyndon Johnson and tell the truth about him.
Oh, well, another incredibly interesting character, much like yourself.
Johnson was a trip.
Next time you come back, we'll talk about your acting career, and you'll keep us updated along the way, I hope. I really enjoy chatting with you.
My pleasure, really. I mean, it's fun.
I'll send you a link
New
to
York,
this.
That's great.
Yeah.
You should know. You're 70 years old. Let me say something. You're 70 years old and you lived in Queens. In fact, I'll tell you what. You lived in Queens?
Yeah.
Okay. I ran the depot for the Soft Ice Cream Company, Carroll Brothers. We had a truck that we ran that had soft ice cream and hamburgers and all that stuff on it. It was the first one that ever did that. And the depot was in Queens.
I'll be darned.
Depot was in Queens, man. I was a kid.
Great place
I ran one in Newark. I ran one in Newark, New Jersey, and then they promoted me. And it was my summer job from when I was at school. And they promoted me because it was a Chicago mob that owned the franchise. Carroll
well,
Brothers.
you have roots in Philadelphia, and I do as well because I have several camp mates. I used to go to summer camp in the Poconos from Philly. One of them introduced me to Pearson's Sporting Goods store. Do you remember that in Philly?
Sure. Yeah, right on Walnut Street. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. My camp buddies, their dad, Red Pearson, and his brother started it. They would outfit the Philadelphia A's.
Right.
They'd make uniforms.
Yep.
We've got some great videos of Connie Mack coming in for their grand opening and what have you. It's nice how things on the East Coast, we have things to talk about. We will and continue this because I want to find out about your adjustment to California. What do you find the differences are between New York and California?
Oh my God, it's night and day.
Yeah, and I want to hear about
the closest city in California to the East Coast is San Francisco.
I live right across the bay from San Francisco.
Because San Francisco's got a lot of influence from Boston. There are a lot of people from Boston that had fingers in San Francisco.
And are there fingers in the firemen unions and the police unions and stuff like that?
We'll talk about that one day.
All right. I'm just taking a wild guess. I don't know where that comes from. I'm a New Yorker with curiosity. Thank you, Jack. I love the interview. You'll come back soon, I hope.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime.
And if you're listening out there, folks, and you enjoy our offerings on Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, please be good enough to box up some books, lightly used children's books, and take them to the Head Start program. Kids need to read. They need to be school ready. They need to develop a passion, and they need to get their noses out of the devices and the games.
Good idea. Boy,
we promote that around here, and I'm glad you're part of it. Thanks, Jack.
Take care.
All right. You too. Adios, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.